It is already week 7 here on Inside the Zone. Justin Kinney joining us from Optimum Performance Sports. And man, Justin, it's unbelievable to think we're this Friday and 2 Fridays after that away from being in the playoffs. This season's gone by amazingly quickly, I think.
It has, and just a couple weeks away from a sectional draw. So, just a couple more weeks these teams have to really start. Every coach talks about peaking at the right time. Only have 3 more weeks to do it.
If you're not in a conference race at this point, are you already starting to think about the postseason,
yeah.
about gearing up certain things that will help you make a run in the postseason, or maybe getting players healthy, or just installing a few things that you know might be an added wrinkle in the playoffs?
All about the next 3 weeks, when you look at it, is getting ready for week 10 or week 11 if you're in Class 5A or 6A. That's the only priority if you're out of a conference race.
So let's talk about conference races right now. Carroll is in the driver's seat, no doubt.
They're looking good.
In the SAC, the biggest hurdle they have to going undefeated in the regular season, no doubt, is this Friday when they take on the Homestead Spartans. Carroll has looked really, really, really good. It's going to be our highlight zone game of the week. But, up until last year, Homestead had owned this series. They had won 7 in a row against Carroll. So how do you see this one playing out? How does Homestead make this a ball game and make it interesting in the fourth quarter?
Well, you have to like what the offense did against Northside, particularly Peyton Slavin, slinging it around for 5 touchdowns. The question is, defensively, can they zero in and get enough stops to be competitive against Carroll? I think that's the huge thing when you look at this matchup is, man, the Chargers have been able to put up points throughout. That defense is excruciatingly difficult to move the football against. But if you're Homestead, you have to feel, how do we keep up on the scoreboard? And there are definite questions on if they can do that.
What do you do to attack that Carroll defense? Because we've seen it be successful at every single level, and in games really step up. Against Bishop Dwenger, the secondary stepped up huge a couple weeks ago. You
need to continue the passing game attack that you did last week. I thought it was very exceptional with Northside, and the key is, of course, doing it against Carroll, which is a different story. But I think there's some positive things that Homestead could take out of that game despite losing late. And one of them is the way that passing game kind of broke loose. So if they can continue that and maybe match Jimmy Sullivan and the Chargers score for score, maybe they can hang around.
So it is SAC rivalry week, which means we're also going to get the Battle of the Bishops.
Yep.
You've got a Dwenger team that now has a new quarterback with Sam Campbell having the injury, and you've got a Bishop Luers team that has to feel pretty good. And as we mentioned, getting ready for the postseason, whatever Luers' record is in the regular season, hey man,
toss it out.
It's a whole new ball game when they start going up against schools closer to their size.
No, it definitely is. And maybe Bishop Luers flying on the radar a little bit, even to us, once they enter the postseason, because we always talked about, well, they're not what they were last year, but maybe that doesn't matter, because when you look at the sectional, Eastside isn't really what they were last year either, and we've had that each of the last 3 seasons in the postseason. So in terms of matchups, you have to like what Charlie Stansky has been able to do as the leading passer in the SAC. And if they can get a win in this one for Bishop Luers, it definitely gives them some good vibes heading into the playoffs.
I want to ask you about Charlie Stansky because his numbers are crazy good. And you take a look at him, we all wondered about replacing a guy like Carson Clark who put up historic numbers. How much of a, I don't want to say pleasant surprise, because I think if you were at Luers, you knew he was going to be a dude. But to the outside world, he has to be kind of the unsung hero of the SAC as far as this Bishop Luers team goes.
He's been a known quantity for a couple of years, knowing that he was backing up Carson Clark and Dad being the offensive coordinator. But he looked extremely shaky in those limited amount of times we saw him, backing up Carson Clark, whether it was late in games or if Carson gets knocked out of a game. We saw him in that East Side matchup last year in the playoffs. And you didn't really know with Carson with Charlie when he was going to be able to get in there and be the QB1. And credit to him. I mean, the kid has put in the work. Not the most athletic kid. He'll be the first one to tell you. Dad will say it too, I'm sure.
You said it sounds like you're talking about me. Continue.
And us as well. But, for him to do what he has done this year and really be a firm presence behind center. He even had to win the job in preseason. I mean, he had a quarterback battle. So how he has been able to perform as a senior, it's one of the feel-good stories. He's not an elite athlete. We're not talking about stars here with Charlie Stansky. But, man, he's had an incredible senior season. I'm proud of him.
If there was a newcomer of the year in the SAC, I know he's not new to the program or he's not a freshman, but I would think that he'd be the guy that went from boom to boom better than anybody else.
I mean, a newcomer to Friday nights by and large, and he's been phenomenal and led the SAC in passing heading into week 6 and had a great week last week. He's really protected the football, particularly the last several weeks. If he can do that again, and Lewis can put up some points, they have a great shot in this one.
Yeah, elsewhere in the SAC, you've got Northrop at Snyder. Snyder heavily favored in that one, and Wayne at Concordia. That old Wayne-Concordia matchup.
They won two without a rival, right?
Yeah, that rivalry that we always love to talk about. But Southside and Northside, obviously, you feel like this is a throw out the record type of thing, but Northside, I want to talk about how they're riding high and how they can use last week's win and really some of the other close contests that they've had, because that's kind of been the knock on them over the years is they'll be competitive, but they haven't won the big games. You can't say that when they took down Dwenger and have taken down Homestead so far in the regular season.
Right, and we talked so much about those first 3 games for Northside, and then the first 6 games, when you look at it, now it eases up. When you have Southside, Northrop, and Concordia to finish up the regular season, there is no reason why Northside can't finish 7-2 in the regular season and really propel them into a sectional that, we feel like Snyder's the favorite, but evidence of that game we saw in week 1, Northside can definitely give them a football game. So, it's good with the Legends because the last couple of years we've heard about them so much in the offseason and then they underperform in the regular season. But credit to Ben Johnson and that group this year. They've emerged from that, very difficult first 6 games at 4-2 and a lot of momentum. It's cliche, but you really throw the records out of this game. We've seen bad Southside teams come in and win the poll. We've seen bad Northside teams come in and win the totem pole. So this one, you throw the records out, definitely. And if Southside can win a game this season, they'd love for it to be for the totem pole.
When you talk about high schoolers and teenagers in general, you talk about learning how to win, especially late in the fourth quarter. They've done that against Dwenger. They did that last week against Homestead in dramatic fashion, so they have to have all the confidence in the world going forward. In the Northeast State, speaking of all the confidence in the world, Columbia City has to feel pretty good about where they are. At the beginning of the season, we were wondering, man, they got to replace Greg Bolt. He's been a 4-year starter. They've got this. They got an offensive lineman now that's playing for Ball State. They just got a lot of pieces to replace specifically on offense, and all they've done is play really, 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 really good football.
Saw them last week live and in person and felt, okay, maybe New Haven can come in and give them a challenge. And Columbia City recovered 3 onside kicks, turned the ball into scores, gave up a long touchdown the first offensive play for New Haven with Mylan Graham going deep from Donovan Williams. Other than that, it was nothing from New Haven. It was dominance once again from Columbia City. It continues to get more and more difficult for them the final third of the season. We're eyeing that Week 9 game. Maybe that could mean something against Norwell. But credit to Columbia City. They've answered the call for sure. Colton Piper has stepped in admirably for Greg Bolt. You look at that multi-headed rushing monster, whether it's Severs, whether it's Gorey, Josh Arntz as well. I mean, it's a very deep, talented offensive team. And defensively, I think, is where they've really opened some eyes because they've dominated the likes of New Haven, DeKalb, Huntington North in consecutive weeks. And we saw just last week how many points Huntington North and DeKalb can put up against questionable defenses.
Well, this is a big week for Columbia City because they go on the road at Kendallville. Not an easy place to play, although Norwell made it look so last week. Plus, they've got Leo the week after, and then, as you said, Norwell the following week in Week 9. When you look at Norwell, last week's win at East Noble or the week when they beat New Haven badly, which of those wins is more impressive to you?
It's very difficult because they were both absolutely convincing. But I'm going to go with last week because of the dominance they laid on East Noble. And it's a team they've beaten each of the last 2 years, 3 now. So they've set that bar. But just
we forget about that, I think.
Right? I know, but the dominance that we saw, even late in the game, not wanting to give up a touchdown there late, gets the stop at the goal line to prevent East Noble from getting on the scoreboard. It's a Norwell team that continues to impress each and every week, and it's difficult to say that because we've seen that dominance from week 1. But, man, I mean, with every successive week, when they're leading the state in points allowed last week, and it goes down after getting a shutout to 2.3 points per game, it's amazing what Norwell is doing. And, when you look at Columbia City, as much faith as we have in them, they're going to lean on that chip on their shoulder the next 3 weeks because you can make a case that they're the underdogs in each of the next 3 weeks, and Columbia City isn't going to let that sit well.
When you talk about the ACAC, last week our highlight zone game of the week, South Adams versus Adams Central. South Adams put up some points, but it was Adams Central taking control relatively early, as many people thought, because this is a team that should things go well, we'll see
Yeah.
them playing down in Indianapolis, hopefully during Thanksgiving weekend. But what do you look for in the ACAC for the rest of the season? Because Adams Central has really, they faced Heritage and they faced South Adams. They've answered the bell against both those teams in resounding fashion.
Could Bluffton match up a little bit? They're kind of beefy up front defensively, so maybe they can slow down that offense of Adams Central just a little bit. But by and large, it's AC's conference at this point. You're already looking ahead and you're saying, do we get another Lutheran Adams Central state championship game in 1A? Lutheran just came off a really good win over Cecina last Friday to stay undefeated. So, I look at those two teams and they're on a collision course to meet again. Adams Central, and talking to Coach Mosier, you'd think they were 0-6 at this point. But he says, we need to continue to refine what we do to maximize our potential in the postseason. He wants to continue to do that over the final third of the season.
The one thing I love about Adams Central is it's not always one guy or two
Right.
guys. Like, it could be Cook, it could be Bloom, it could be Tester,
Black,
it could be Black, it could be Hamilton. Like, it could be, there's so many guys that take the torch on a given Friday night. It makes them really tough to prepare for, specifically for a 1A or a 2A school going up against them.
It is so frustrating when you feel like you've identified and taken away three guys, and Adams Central has three more guys to step up and burn you.
Yeah, that is going to be a problem, especially when the 1A playoffs come around. I want to talk about the NECC now, because I don't remember at the beginning of the season how much we were talking about the Angola Hornets.
Yeah.
I was high on the Garrett Railroaders. Their season has not gone as planned. I thought Fairfield would be again in the conference championship. We didn't talk a whole lot about West Noble.
Sure.
They've been a nice team as well. But man, Angola with resounding victories against West Noble and against Fairfield last week. Man, how did we overlook the Hornets? What did we do wrong?
Well, I think it's been a couple of years since that heyday of Angola back-to-back undefeated regular seasons, and I think we kind of questioned whether this team was capable of at least matching the potential of this team from the last couple of years that underperformed, and at least winning a big division. And here they are, all but wrapped up the division, the big division in the NECC. The defense is what has impressed me, from the early part of the season, and in particular what we saw with last week. Carter Kitson was out for Fairfield, I know, but defending a triple option and limiting it to under 100 yards of total offense for the game, absolutely impressive. Angola, and credit to Andy Thomas and that group from bouncing back. We had heard for a couple of years their younger groups were coming up and they were going to be really good, and you don't really know until you see it on Friday nights, but it's been a very good bounce back year for the Hornets.
And in the NECC this week, the big game really is Central Noble at Churubusco. It's in the small division, but Central Noble coming off a loss, but 2-0 in small division play, taking on Churubusco in Turtletown. If Central Noble wins, that could set up a big game for the small division title next week with Eastside and Central Noble. So how do you see this one playing out? Because I think Central Noble, Hayden Kilgore's done a really nice job, and they fly a little bit under the radar with Eastside and Busco, traditional powerhouses there. But they've played pretty well so far this season, specifically on the defensive side of the football when they face a team perhaps with a little less talent.
Right, and for this one, Churubusco's ability to control the tempo of the game, I think, is going to be a huge thing. And the beauty of the NECC this year has been every week, seemingly the storylines change, right? From week one, we looked at the SAC, and we've seen Carroll dominate and Norwell dominate the NE8, and ACAC is Adams Central's. The NECC, we've kind of thrown up our hands and say, when we think we have it figured out, something happens. So you looked at the big division and you said, early on, was it West Noble, and then it ended up being Angola. Small division, you got Eastside, and then you throw in Busco, you throw in Central Noble, and there's still, things to figure out in that division. So it's a breath of fresh air comparatively to what we have in the other three major divisions or conferences, is that, we're still trying to figure out who the best teams in the NECC are.
Heading into this week, what are you most looking forward to about Week 7? Because as we mentioned, you are gearing up for the playoffs. You do have conference races still being decided, but for a large part of it, we kind of know how it's going to play out for the most part.
Bluffton Heritage, I think, is on the radar. Two teams that are trying to make a stamp in the ACAC and where they're at. And I know Heritage, after beating South Adams, tough losses, Adams Central, and then late in the game against LaPel on the road last week. And then the SAC, we talked at the top about coaches really focusing on the postseason now. I think in the SAC, this is the week that you want to get a win, and then those last 2 weeks, you're really starting to prep. So, whether you've had a successful season or not, it can flip based on what happens a Week 7 rivalry week.
All right, week 7, we'll have you covered this Friday night on the Highlight Zone, and we'll talk about it next Monday here on Inside the Zone. For Justin, I'm Glenn. We'll see you next Monday.